Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. Today I'm joined by a special guest, Amelia Misenheimer. Today we'll dive into a topic that's not only crucial for real estate investors, but also for families planning their financial future. Real estate is one of the most powerful tools for building wealth, but what happens when it's time to pass those assets on to the next generation? Without the right planning and conversations, families can find challenges that undermine all the hard work that was put into building their real estate portfolios. Amelia is here with us today to help navigate this important subject. Amelia is a seasoned real estate investor, military spouse, and industry expert with over a decade experience in real estate. She began her personal real estate investing journey in 2010 and became a realtor and property manager in 2012. Over the years, she's worked with thousands of clients, helping them unlock the potential of real estate to create passive income, save significantly on taxes, and build generational wealth. Amelia, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marc. I'm so excited to be here. I appreciate you having me today.
Great. So I'm looking forward to today's topic. I know you've worked with thousands of clients who've been involved in countless of real estate transactions, including those involving inherited properties. Not everyone likes to inherit real estate or even wants to inherit it. Yet it's in one of the topics that you're interested in and you focus on. So how did you get involved on that specific? Was there like a specific instance that caused you to think about that or really delve into it?
Life happened. No, so as you mentioned in the intro, I was a real estate agent for 12 years. I am still actually a licensed realtor in the state of New Mexico. But I was also a property manager. We managed over 450 properties. So I got a wide exposure to a lot of real estate, a lot of good, a lot of bad, a lot of everything. So in that case, though, we had a pretty significant owner and they ended up passing away. So with their portfolio, it really exposed me, and I was able, being, in the role of a property manager, to get kind of that in-depth look at what does this look like when you have, a significant portfolio being subdivided amongst children, passed down. How does the taxes affect it? Of course, you have an estate that big. The IRS came in for their portion. So in the midst of everything, there's an IRS audit going on. And it just really opened my eyes to how impactful this was. My family has always, we've been in business. We're a third generation entrepreneurial family. For better or worse, my parents never hid anything from us. They never shielded us. And we had, I grew up having conversations about interest rates and CDs when I was like 8. And, I had my first bank account at 6. And, so it was thankful and lucky to me to have this exposure, but seeing it pass to that next generation and realizing the power of that, of what, could do to this next generation when they inherited that money, but also seeing how some of the siblings that inherited the money turned around and sold the properties, which is great. They can get the cash, and then we can go into step up in basis. And, there is a lot of advantages too, to just holding it on and letting the next generation sell it if they want. But so much of the time that second or third generation doesn't really understand the power of owning the asset, owning the wealth, getting that, continuous monthly income for the passive income as an additional cash flow. So also in my experience, I've seen it over and over again. Like, the parents are really big into real estate. I actually worked with a client and her dad taught her nothing about real estate. And so before he passed, they sold the whole portfolio. He liquidated it. So she inherited cash, but here she is now, in her 50s, trying to relearn what could have been a huge birthright to her had her parents taken a different approach with it.
And I think you brought up a good point, is that in this case, the parents never taught the children about it. As a financial advisor, one thing I see all the time is that people's financial skills, they either come from two places. What you learn from your parents, from either seeing or explicit learning, if the parents will teach you, or from school. And I think school has gotten a little bit better than what it used to. Like, it used to be there was nothing. You learned nothing in school, and it's slightly better now. And I think there's financial literacy programs out there trying to get it better, but it's still got a long way to go to really get people prepared. So a lot of the onus comes down to the families and comes down to the parents. But the parents, a lot of times, and there's probably a lot of different reasons why. One, they might not feel they have the time to put into it. They may not know what's the proper way of doing it. What can an 8-year-old learn? What can a 10-year-old, a 12? What's the right time? It's something that I think can, like you said, can go a long way to, and like you said, selling the properties may be the right thing ultimately for them to do, but they at least should be able to have the information to evaluate whether that's what makes sense. I guess just from your experience, how would you approach that as a parent? Like, let's say you did have a real estate portfolio. What's the right age to get started?
I think the more you normalize it, the better off you are. So, I don't have any children, so I can't speak to, how I would handle my own children, but how I was raised, and I like to think my parents did a good job on it. But, we went around and collected rent with them when they went on door knocking. We went and, helped repair rentals as a kid. I remember 14 years old tearing out this terrible house. The carpet was full of feces. It was awful. But it was so interesting because I hate that people live that way, but it's a matter of fact, people live that way. You will have rental properties that have these things. You will have this stuff come up. But the person who lived that way was some super duper high powered, this great job, and was kind of touted as this like excellent renter and this great. And then we walk in their house and you're just like, oh my goodness, what in the world happened? It's been a huge impact for me growing up, especially seeing it at that age. When you're a kid, you don't have the filters or the blinders or the judgment factor that you have, as an adult, and you can blow off something or belittle it. But as a kid, it is. There is no kind of judgment to it. It just is. And seeing that was so humbling for me because it really taught me also, like, what you see on the outside of a person isn't always, what's behind closed doors either. And it's just, I think getting them involved. And I remember growing up and counting money and playing, with just coins and counting back cash and how to, count back change, which is, a lost skill today, but just that familiarity with money and having a checking account. My dad I needed a bicycle. We recently moved and they have some really great bike trails, and growing up in New Mexico, we don't have any bike trails. We just have open space. And so my dad just recently fixed up, and it was my first bike I ever bought with my own money. And I wrote a check for it at 12 years old out of my checking account. And I was so proud of it. And I still to this day remember that, that's still my bike. That's still such an impactful moment. So I think being able to give your children those opportunities to live, I'll say, like a mini adult, or to have that exposure, I think can go so far and just do so much. Like my grandfather, actually, we used to trade stocks with each other. So he obviously was retired and had the time to sit there and watch C-SPAN all the time, but he didn't know how to use the technology or MSNBC. He'd watch the TV, he'd know what's going on, and he'd call me like, Amelia, buy this stock. I'm like, okay. And it was fun because I had the tech side, but he had the opportunity. I was in school, I was in college. I didn't, have a lot of that space to do that, but it was really fun because it also gave us something to do together and work together on. It taught me about what he was watching because he was a farmer, so he liked to watch commodities and he liked to watch futures. And how else would you get that experience, right? I guess there's probably a college class out there somewhere, but to just have that hands-on experience was just so invaluable and still holds such a special place in my heart to have that time with my grandfather. You can't replace that.
Yeah, so I think it's a great bonding activity, not just from the business aspect of it or learning the actual financial concepts or tools, but it's something that you treasure and you value on both sides of it.
Yeah. It gives you the ability to have different kinds of conversations. As a financial planner, I'm sure you see it all the time that, money is such a taboo subject in so many families, but yet it's just a tool. And I feel like, removing that taboo-ness around it and treating it as a tool, it is a thing that can make your life easier. It can make your life harder. It can, do great things for you. It can ruin your day. There's so many ways to treat money, but it's just a tool. It's a thing to have a strategy on. It's a thing to approach. It's a thing to use. The more you have those conversations, the easier life is.
Why do you think so many people don't have those conversations, as they're approaching the end of life and what's going to happen to this real estate portfolio?
That's a great question. I think a lot of it is death. As a society, we are so fortunate. I feel, in America, especially, death is not common. Back in the day when you used to lose half your siblings, or, there's still so many countries that are, death is so common. They have weekly funerals for everybody who died that week, or, things like that. But in our country, in our culture, death is not common. Death is scary. Death is, this traumatic experience. And so anything associated with that, I feel like gets skipped and gets avoided and doesn't talk, because nobody who wants to talk about and like my mom they have rental properties. I grew up in this. My mom called me and she's like, how do you want us to handle this? I'm like, well, I don't really want to talk about you dying, Mom, because that is hard. That is emotionally hard, but it's a fact of life. It's coming for all of us, And so having either, if you can't have it yourself, getting in a professional to help you navigate those conversations, even a therapist, a skilled financial planner, but making sure, estate agents, estate lawyers, making sure that everybody's on the same page. So when that time does come, you are more prepared. And it can be making sure your life insurance policies are all in one place. It can be making sure the properties are in a trust. It can be making sure, death deeds are filed, or whatever the case is. And that's what's hard about this too, right? There's so many ways to prepare an estate for, that transition. So there's no right or wrong answer to how you do it. It's just doing it. Not doing it is the wrong answer, but, just embracing and having a plan that everybody's relatively clear on, even if you don't tell, hey, sibling A, you're getting this much, and sibling B, you're getting this much. I understand parents that want to maintain some sort of privacy in the will, or, as they draft these things up, but still having that, okay, kids, you're going to inherit these properties. They are going to be in a trust. We can set up a trust, manager. We can make sure that they are with a property manager, so you have relatively little responsibility. You can inherit the properties as, single family, and you can manage them. But just having those conversations, I think, is so powerful, because it, one, allows that next generation to be involved with the process, right? Nobody wants to lose a parent, but being able to have time to prepare yourself for that process, and then also what it's going to look like after, I think is huge.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a good point. The organization of it's important, from not just being organized, but also when someone dies, there's going to be grieving, and to make it easier, instead of having to scramble and figure out this, look for this, the more organization, the more structure in place can definitely help. One of the things you initially mentioned was a step-up in basis. Can you explain what a step-up in basis is and how it pertains to real estate?
Absolutely. So in today's tax code situation, right? So, these things change with Congress and everything else. So as today stands, when a person dies, the next generation will inherit that property, and they inherited the value at death. So if your parents bought a house, 30 years ago for say $50,000, and now that house is worth $500,000, when they pass, you're going to inherit that property at today's cost. So $500,000. So I'm going to get this property at $500,000. There's not going to be any tax consequences with that. There's not, I don't have to pay capital gains on that difference. I don't have to do any of that. Now I own that property at $500,000, and it's my choice. So if I want to turn around and sell it for $500,000, then I sold it for cost, because my cost was $500,000, of which is the price I inherited at. I don't have to, whereas if my parents would have sold it, say 2 years before they died, they would have had to pay capital gains tax on that $500,000, from when they bought it, in $50,000. And especially then, if, they had it rented out, you'd have to, do recoverable depreciation. And then there's so many pieces to it. So, and this is a conversation that I recently had with my parents. They were working with their financial advisor, and he asked, should you liquidate all your real estate? Because it is easier to inherit cash, right? It's easier to say, hey, child, everybody gets their, pile of cash. Here it is. That is an easier option. But I was like, Mom, you did not raise me for this way. I was like, no, my mother's in her 70s, at this point, let's get the step up in basis and let's play this game. I don't want the pile of cash. I want the assets. I want the rental income. I want, all of those types of things, because there is just such an advantage to inheriting it that way. And then, I'm not an estate attorney. I always recommend people working with estate attorneys, accountants, make sure you have the correct professionals when you're working with things. But also, using a trust. Those trusts, are great tools as well to pass real estate, to protect investments and things like that. So just having those conversations, because all of these things take time to set up too, right? Like there are certain requirements with the IRS that certain things have to be set up for so many years before somebody passes. And I'm not the expert in all those, technicalities, but it takes planning, and you need to be kind of ahead of the game on a lot of this. It's not meant for last minute, throw everything in a trust and we'll be fine.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a good point on the step up in basis. A lot of people don't really understand how much you can save on taxes just from that. And the example you gave, if the parents sold the property, you mentioned 2 years, even the day before they died, if they sold it for $500 and they paid $50, they're looking at $450,000 of capital gains. Yeah. Whereas if it gets sold the day after they died, it's zero capital gains. So you're talking potentially taxes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars of savings, which can really be beneficial. All this about communication, I think, is great. What happens when siblings are involved, right? And now one sibling has an idea or a thought, I should inherit the cash. The other one says, no, I'm interested in the real estate business. Or is I guess communication even more critical at that point? Or like, have you seen any instances where parents kind of divvy up the estate and say, okay, you're getting this portfolio, you're getting this property, or kind of, I guess it can get very complex.
It really can. And I have seen a lot of different situations. We had one, and it was the grandparents picked out a few properties because it meant like certain sentimental value to the children or grandchildren who are going to inherit that property. And so it was specified, like, this kid gets this house. Well, when it comes out to it, it was a very unequal distribution of the value of the assets. So then the executor of the estate, they're like, okay, no, we're not going to do that. Like, we understand the intent, but it's more important, to say, no, each kid gets equal value, even though that they're, the parents did have that intent for, this house goes to this kid, this house goes to that kid. So there are a lot of complicated factors like that. I had a friend, her father inherited the business. It was a fledgling business from his father, and his brother inherited all the cash. So the one brother got the business, basically, we'll say worth nothing. It's his blood, sweat, and tears. And the other sibling got the house and a pile of cash. Well, guess what? 50 years later, the business is booming. They are very well off financially, and the brother has blown through all of his cash, now works for the brother in the business, and is spiteful about it because he doesn't have half of that business.
Yeah.
It is amazing the strife that can come out of siblings dealing with death and the money and the nastiness and all of that. And it is truly a shame, but I do feel having those conversations beforehand does help. Now, it doesn't change that, like, this brother didn't want the business, and 50 years later, he's regretting that decision or has different feelings about it, or, that kind of thing. You can't change that. You can't prevent that. However, when the kids are involved in that conversation, it does empower them to own it, if, for lack of a better term, that if they're not happy with it, they help build the plan. So, they've got to eat their own crow to that extent.
Sure. If we look at it from the eyes of the person or people inheriting the property, how should they determine? So let's say they are going to, it hasn't been liquidated. They're going to inherit the property. How should they determine, yes, this is worth keeping, or should I sell it? Because I think what happens a lot of times, the people that owned the property, were renting the property, they may become emotionally attached to it, whereas it's not. I mean, yeah, maybe it was working fine, and maybe they had it for 30 years, so it looks good. They are comfortable with it. But when you look at the details of it, maybe it isn't such a good investment. Maybe there is other opportunities out there, whether it's real estate or other something else, that the equity could be better used. How should a person who maybe isn't really seasoned real estate investor, how should they look at this? I'm inheriting this property. What should I do with it?
I am currently working in a role of like a real estate consultant, and that's kind of come through a lot of different iterations in my life. And these are the kind of conversations that it is my goal to have, because if, like you said, if they're not okay with inheriting the property, or that it doesn't really, I'll say, align with their vision or with their life, then what do they do? For example, I have cousins. We are from a small town in New Mexico. All of my cousins have moved away, but the parents have a lot of rentals. None of my cousins want those rentals in our small hometown. Like, they've got no reason to come back. So they have had those conversations with my aunt and uncle in that case. And, and they have been selling the properties. And even if you decide to sell a property because it's not a right property for you, it's not, doesn't fit your need, you don't want to go back to the hometown where your parents had all these properties, because there is so many changes in how society works in this day and age than it did, 50, 100 years ago. But there's creative ways to sell the property. So you could sell it, like on a real estate contract, for example. Say the tenants love the house, they want to stay there and they want to buy it. You can sell it on a real estate contract, make an extra, 8-10% on your money, get the consistent monthly income, and then also, spread out the tax consequences, which there would be minimal because you just inherited at cost, but, spread that out too. You could just turn around and sell it and say, hey, look, I want to sell a whole portfolio. Here's 10 properties I inherited. I don't want any of them. And then, that gives you the opportunity too to 1031 that money into something else. So then what is that something else? Is it a multifamily property in another market that's more suitable for you? Is it investing it, in kind of a syndication, or, it's finding those different avenues that allow a person to invest that aligns with them. It could be just putting it in stocks and they're happy with that and they're happy with how it grows. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But, empowering the kid too to have that plan, but then also outlining that plan. Okay, you're going to inherit this set of properties. You're going to want to sell your 4 properties. We all know that. We all get that. Maybe give the other siblings the first opportunity to buy out that property, because they'll inherit these paid 4 properties essentially. And then they could refinance it and give the other one cash and keep the assets. That might align more with some of the other siblings. So it's really just having those conversations, as hard as they are, but it all starts and being honest with what you want or don't want.
As a consultant, would you kind of look at, so maybe they don't know what they want to do. Maybe they think, oh, well, I just inherited this. If it's a good investment, maybe I'll keep it. But they don't know how to evaluate a property. How would you go about helping them kind of figure out, oh yes, this property is doing very well, or no, this property is not doing well. That's, we can, but they're interested in real estate. We can find another property that maybe makes more sense for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, no. So there's a couple pieces to that puzzle. First, I would, and when you inherit an asset like real estate and you're dealing with grief, some of it's don't make any dramatic decisions, right? Like, let's work through the grief. Let's give you time to let the dust settle and, reestablish where you're at, how you're really feeling without, all of this trauma kind of going on at the same time. But then, okay, let's look at this property. Can you depreciate it? Because obviously depreciation is such a huge piece of, real estate and the tax benefits of owning real estate. So what are your depreciation options? What kind of, income is it bringing in? And then is that accurate market income? One of the biggest fallacies with a lot of, especially these older generations, they don't raise the rent to market rates. It's always been at $700 a month and they keep renting it at $700 a month, and the same person's lived there for 20 years because they're, the rent rate's half of what market rate is. So it'd be evaluating what rent it currently is. Can you bring it up to market rate? Does that still look, and then repairs required on the property. So is this property been neglected and, you come from a family of, they fix everything with duct tape and it can wait till tomorrow. And, you just inherited a giant remodel project that might be better off you taking your cash and putting it somewhere. That might be a turnkey property if that doesn't align with you. You might see it as a great opportunity to flip it and have all this fun with it and remodel it. And that's great for you too. But, it'd be having those individual conversations with the individual. What meets your goals? What makes, what works with the time that you have available? Because flipping a property is not, a small time deal. That takes investment, focus, attention, follow up, and not everybody has that. So it's working through each step of those to really look, okay, what's going to work for me and what's not, and then being real about that.
How do they, I think one of the things that people struggle with is there's different ways of investing in real estate. You mentioned syndication, to actually owning, to actually flipping, but this whole thought of passive investment. How does someone someone who's never been in real estate before, how can they figure out what really is what amount of active work am I willing to do with this property. And that can be from fully managing it to actually like a fix and flip like you talked about. But I think people struggle a lot with kind of grasping that, okay, this is going to take work. The word passive income gets thrown out a lot, but they have trouble figuring out what truly, how much work am I going to have to put into this? What's the best way to kind of get a handle on this is how much of my time is going to be needed to manage this property. I'm using manage broadly as owning the property.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question because it does, right? Everybody's like, oh, real estate's passive income. No, real estate is really not that passive. The most passive income you can get in real estate is investing in, say, a syndication, and it's somebody else managing your money, right? Which is a same concept as giving your money over to a financial advisor where they manage it, they make the stock trades, they do sells, buys as needed, and you get your check, you pay a fee, you get your check or your dividends or, your statements as every month, and you really do nothing. So that's kind of that syndication approach. And it really is very much a do nothing. But you're looking at a longer time commitment to tie up your money. A lot of those, syndications want 5 years as kind of a minimum time frame for them to get properties turned around, investments done, things like that. And you'll make money in the time frame and get disbursements. But, you're kind of committing your money for 5 years, we'll say, generally speaking, on kind of that syndication side. So then you get kind of the next level of passive income, which is a little less passive. And that's, if you have a property manager. So you inherited these properties. They've already been set up with a property manager. The system's working well. They're managing it. They know the property. That's probably the next easiest thing is just leave it with a property manager, update the account so you're getting the money. And also on this, making sure that you are doing your finances correctly for this process too. So if you want to start collecting that rent check, especially if you have a property manager, you've got rentals, like make sure you have a rental account for this, that you're accounting separately all of these repairs that are going to come up, the income that you make, things like that. Your accountant can certainly help you with this process. If they can't, find a new accountant, but they will be able to walk you through, how to set up kind of that rental account to support these new assets that you have. So leaving them with the property manager, yes, you're going to get the calls and saying, hey, this is broken, or do we have permission to fix this? Or this tenant's not paying, we're going to go forward with eviction. So you're going to have more involvement in that. And it's probably, a few hours a month at most, because you're really just going to be answering questions, supporting, and then reading your statements. And I cannot encourage reading your statements enough, making sure that you know what's going on with your properties. Is the rent being paid? Is the rent market rate? And your property manager should be on top of all of this, but should is a very magical word. So it will take a learning curve as you familiarize yourself with what this means. And a good property manager will also walk you through this. A good property manager will walk you through your statements. If they don't, I am here for you. I'm happy to walk you through your statements and, go through this step by step of what this actually, really looks like on a day-to-day monthly basis, and how can you be, manage the manager essentially. And then the most involved level of this would be you managing them all yourself, which if you've never done that yourself could be a huge crash course of, making sure you got all the leases signed and making sure that you're scanning the tenants appropriately and going out and fixing the toilets yourself, or, calling the handyman or calling the plumber or whatever it is. And so that's obviously the biggest crash course if you've never done it before. But it's one of the best ways to learn real estate, because you're going to get your hands dirty and you're going to learn it whether you like it or not. And that's always an opportunity, but I don't always recommend that approach either.
Yeah, but I guess there's a lot of ways to get involved depending upon, what's of interest to someone. All right, Amelia, that's all the questions I have for you today. I want to thank you for joining me on today's episode. Before we go, where can our listeners go to learn more about you and what you do?
I am on all the social medias, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and it's Amelia, Amelia G Misenheimer, which is really long. I really should have really thought about all this when I created all my handles and whatnot, but it's just Amelia G Misenheimer. I think I'm the only one, so you'll be able to track me down. And I do offer free discovery calls for anybody who's interested, a 20-minute quick chat to see, how I might be able to help you with your different real estate challenges. But I am open to any type of questions, conversation, because I want to be open and have these real conversations, because I feel, so much of real estate, it's that pretty frilly, like passive income. It's all, wonderful. And there needs to be real conversations had, right, and real plans had. And, some of them can be difficult conversations, especially when talking about estate planning or that next generation.
Great. We'll link to all that in the show notes. Thanks again, Amelia. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Don't forget to follow the Agent of Wealth on the platform you listen from and leave us a review of the show. We're currently accepting new clients, and if you'd like to schedule a one-on-one consultation with our advisors, please do so at bautisfinancial.com/call.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.